In the know.
Good evening, everyone.
In the know.
Tony Reeves.
Fire. Following the news in any way, shape, or form.
No shortage of things to talk about.
What does it mean? What will it bring?
This is a reality we simply have to accept.
Tony Reeves. Fire. Tony Reeves.
Let's go ahead and get started.
Welcome to another edition of In the Know. I am your host, Tony Reeves. So today, I want to talk to you about what happens when you make the decision to give your 2 weeks notice. So the reality is that when you make that point in your time being there, then you've decided that you've now found another opportunity, or you've just decided that it's time for you to move on. You may feel that it's necessary for you to give what's referred to as a 2 weeks notice. It's a notice to your employer that you are ending your time of employment, giving them a specific date, letting them know that these are the last 2 weeks that you will be there. Part of the courtesy behind it is this notion of putting them on notice so that they can take whatever necessary steps are possible to replace you. It also gives you the ability to have a transitional period of time in terms of informing whoever may come behind you what they need to do, things of that nature. But I want you to think about 5 particular things, that I think you should give some serious thought to, understanding about what happens when you give your 2 weeks notice. The first thing I want to talk to you about is understanding that your employer will view you differently. Now, you've got to remember, when you are working for an employer, you have an employer-employee relationship. So as a result, there are certain expectations in terms of things that they will do for you and things you'll do for them. But when you put your employer on notice that you are no longer going to be an employee, their nature in terms of how they view you is going to change. Now, I know that's kind of funky to hear, but the reality is that is the case, maybe. It's like you're now telling them that you want to sever that relationship. So I'm not telling you that when you give your 2 weeks notice, it's going to be adversarial. That's not the point I'm trying to make. But you need to understand that they now look at you as somebody they no longer can rely on you to be there after 2 weeks. They no longer can rely on you to be able to do certain follow-ups. They can no longer rely on you for a variety of different things. So they don't necessarily look negatively upon you. They just they understand the reality that you are now going to no longer occupy a space as an employee. Therefore, how they view you, and more importantly, how they engage with you, is going to be very different. So it's important that you understand that in the grander scheme of things, that once you make the decision to give them 2 weeks notice, their relationship with you is going to change. Second thing I want you to focus on, stay engaged during your notice period. Now, this is going to sound weird here, but there is this misconception that some people have that during that last 2 weeks notice, it is a work vacation. You ain't got to do Nathan. And it's important that you understand is that even though you have given your 2 weeks notice, there is this expectation that you're going to still do your job, because you didn't say you're quitting today. You're saying you're going to stop working in 2 weeks. So that means for the next 2 weeks, you are still an employee of that company. So when they are engaging you during that 2 week time period, there is this huge desire to act as if, I ain't got to do nothing, man. It's all chill in the neighborhood. No. You've told them that you're going to leave. You've told them when you're going to leave. But you've also, whether you know it or not, told them that you're going to still keep working until you leave. So it's important that you understand that your professionalism, your reputation that you have is going to be relied upon. How do you conduct yourself during those 2 weeks? So it's important for you to know, and I cannot stress this enough, that if you know you've got about those 2 weeks, that during that time period, still maintain the level of professionalism. Because guess what? They're still expecting you to do work, and you should still expect to do work. Number 3, expect some changes in your access. Now, this is going to sound really wonky when I say this, but this is what I mean. Remember, once you've told your employer that you are no longer going to be an employee, they have to treat you as someone who could possibly do something adversarial to the company. Now, that's not saying that you actually will. Now, I need to stress that emphatically. I'm not telling you that I expect you to thug out. I don't expect you to do anything wonky. But the reality is that they may view your access to certain information as not necessary. In other words, they may make the determination that since you are no longer going to be an employee, they may just decide that, you know what, we're going to look at what you do and we're going to take specific protections to put in place to deny you certain access to certain things, because if you're not going to be here in 2 weeks, then you may not need to have that access. That's important to know, because what ends up happening a lot of times is that we get caught in this position where we believe we have a right to do our job all the way up to the end. And then when something changes, we get into our feels. Listen, this has nothing to do with an attitude towards you. These are procedural protections that your employer feels that they must put in place in order to ensure that the transition from what you're doing to whoever's going to take your place in the future is not impacted by the fact that you are still gainfully employed there. So if you find yourself in a situation where your employer decides, hey, we're going to go in a different direction in terms of giving you access to certain things, before you catch an attitude, recognize this is just a process that they need to do in order to protect the company as a whole. Number 4, understand what your employer expects from you. Now, this is going to sound cray, but think about this for a second. You're about to leave in 2 weeks. There are probably things in your job that requires you to do things that are 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks out. You may have things that you may need to do that others behind you may need to follow up on. That's going to put your employer in a very unique situation. So what you need to ask yourself is, or more importantly, ask your employer, what is their expectations in terms of what they expect you to do while you're still there? So they may ask you to train others. They may ask you to take on different tasks outside of what you normally do. They may even reduce your responsibilities altogether. All of those things are important. So when you find yourself in this position where you know you are about to leave the company, take it upon yourself to engage your employer and ask your employer, hey, what are your expectations for me before I leave? What do you want me to do during this 2 weeks? Do you want to keep doing the job that I normally do? Or do you want me to do something else? This way, it feeds into that notion of the professionalism that we spoke about before. And it also sets this expectation of your employer that you're willing to be a team player on the way out the door, giving them the ability to be able to utilize your skill sets in other areas while they transition to bringing somebody else on board in terms of replacing you for what you do. Fifth and the final thing is be prepared for an early exit. I cannot stress this enough. Most states out there are what we call at-will states, meaning you can leave whenever you want to and they can terminate you whenever they want to. Why am I sharing with you? Because a lot of times what happens is people plan for a part of their exit strategy to include those 2 weeks. In other words, they expect the employer to honor those 2 weeks. Well, what happens if the employer makes a decision on the day you give your 2 weeks notice, that 2 weeks notice is effectively a 24-hour notice? Well, again, you told me today that you're going to be gone 2 weeks. I'm going to save you that 2 weeks. You can leave right now. Then all of a sudden you feel that you're going to feel a certain kind of way. Brace yourself for the reality. Brace yourself for the reality that your employer may decide the day you tell them, maybe even a week after you tell them, that they've decided that they're going to end your employment relationship with them earlier. And before you start losing your mind and getting in your feels, recognize that is within their right. Just as you could easily walk in that day and say, you know what, I've decided I'm not going to give you 2 weeks notice, I'm out. At the same instance, they can do the same thing to you and say, you know what, deuces, dog, we're going to let you go. I'm not telling you that you need to freak out about this. I'm just saying that when you are in the process of planning your exit from your company and you know you're going to give them 2 weeks notice, plan for the reality that they may ask you to leave sooner. So in other words, if you know you needed to do something during that 2 weeks, why don't you move it up a little earlier? Get whatever you needed to have done. So when you give your 2 weeks notice, you don't need to rely on having those 2 weeks in order to do things. And that's both internally and externally. So this way you don't get caught off guard and you don't feel a particular way when the employer makes a particular decision that, you know what, I have made this decision that you no longer need to be here, and I wish you the very best of luck. Deuces. People, when you're planning your exit from an employer, it is not always as smooth as you'd like to think. But it's important for you to understand the points that I've tried to bring to your attention today. Remember, every employer is going to look at you differently once you've told them that you no longer are going to stay there. That's the first point. As well as important that you understand that if you're going to give them 2 weeks, you should be expected and are going to be expected to work those 2 weeks. But remember, the nature of your employment is going to change. So your access to certain things may be impacted by the fact that you've given them 2 weeks. Understand that your employer may change the nature of what you're doing for them since they know you're getting ready to leave. And if you find yourself in a situation where they decide to end your employment relationship early, don't freak. Just trust that was a natural part of the process and you have planned for it accordingly. This can be a smooth transition or it can be a rocky one. But the best part about it is you're in the position where you know you're going to leave. So you are in the best position to deal with all these things ahead of time so that you can transition in a manner that works best for you. All right, everyone. Thank you again for tuning in to another edition of In the Know. I am your host, Tony Reeves. Remember, you can find me on almost all your major podcast platforms and social media. And as always, I have to make sure I make this point abundantly clear. If I haven't said this more, I'm going to say it to you again. My famous question for you, as always, are you ready for the Anthony Reeves experience? Have a good day, everybody.